were committing suicide by way of giving themselves as a gift to others. That is the origin of potlatch. And the habit was so cruel that by the time they no longer have their own things to give, they were part of the exchange economy of America, meaning that they give things that they themselves bought, like guns, alcohol, and other things. So much so that the government, federal government, forbade the tribes to exercise this tradition. And in the 20s, a French anthropologist, Marcel Mauss, wrote a famous thin book, perhaps proportioned to the amount of text, not the most famous book in anthropology, in which he assesses the dawn, as my great colleague and friend Mr. Scher contributor to potlatch number 2, on the work of that you can see here of Francois Boé. So in the essence to the dawn, he tried to generalize the idea of the gift as it is applied to the South Sea Islanders, where they have what they call the kind of ceremony in which the kula, in which they move, like the arbors, they move from one island to island with their presence. And from that moment onwards, it almost entered into the French language for peculiar reasons, because the French are not particularly known for their generosity and gift giving. Nevertheless, one of these non-French really, because she was a Jewess originally from Russia, Bernstein, who had the privilege and the suffering of being the wife of Yehuda. She produced the first potlatch magazine. And this potlatch magazine is not very well known because it is forgotten, because it was originally not terribly interesting, because it was a political genre of day-to-day political commentary on what happened in France at the time, which was terribly important to the people who lived at the time, I admit, but it was looked in the perspective of the time, and basta, there's not more to it. And if you look it up today in the library, you will find rather kind of not particularly interesting day-to-day commentary on the politics of the day. So, therefore, I felt free from the necessity to mention these predecessors. So I am happy to acknowledge, and I can tell you that I met Miss Bernstein when Mr. Yehuda, she also already divorced him. He eventually committed suicide, unfortunately. Right. But for good reason, as we know, we all have a good reason to commit suicide. And if we don't, it's because we have such a thing as potlatch to think about, and that helps us expecting an abrupt ending. But the point is that Bernstein, when I met her with the great English artist Anthony Hill, who's a kind of constructivist English artist, who had also two identities, by the way, and was a great friend of Duchamp and Vito especially, who invited him to be her secretary, but he refused to be her secretary because he said he couldn't play chess and he couldn't drive a car. And perhaps he could have added that he had never been to America. So how could it be a secretary to the widow of Martin Duchamp? But the point is that this man, Anthony Hill, who had some talent in mathematics as opposed to chess, which are not the same, by the way. And we traveled together to the west of England to meet the Bernstein, who was the original editor of potlatch. And I must say that she lived like an English gentleman in the west of England in a minor manor house with a swimming pool. And I will never forget the pleasure of swimming in the great situationist swimming pool in the style of a British gentleman. But it was very funny, of course, because after all she was a Russian Jewess with a French kind of patina, but no more. And all this leads me to potlatch, because potlatch is exactly at this terrible crossroad, Only recently, some friends from Mumbai, one Indian and one Spanish Basque, Matthias, we proposed for the next Triennale of Architecture in Lisbon, we propose to connect all the points of the Portuguese Empire in the world and make out into a triennale. But people turned down, obviously, because it was a little bit too radical for the new generation of art bureaucrats in Lisbon. But the point is that our potlatch is anyhow doing precisely that, because we have people like François Boé, who I will not describe because he's exactly the epitome of this crossroad of the world, just as the other contributors to the magazine, like Cristobal from Santiago de Chile, like J.V. from Seoul, and it's so rare that we are able to keep ourselves any thoughts, to acknowledge the fact that what we know is always a very partial and very limited view of the world. I mean, you know, I always had so many friends and students who were Korean, and I always appreciated them for whatever they were. Very good. But I never asked myself the difficult question of who are they? You know, what kind of things make them move and so on. And I realized only relatively recently that indeed they are very different from other people, for better or worse. But they are different, and that difference, which is so incredibly important for us, is something very difficult to follow, especially across different cultures, languages, and so on. So potlatch is in fact one way in which to acknowledge it, one way in which to acknowledge that there could be a world just beyond what people normally think the world is, including things like credit and debit and so on. Because credit and debit, like everything else, is human invention. And the most important thing that potlatch is dedicated to is the idea that the world could be otherwise. There is a world that could be otherwise. In any moment, in any time, anywhere in the world, with any people, it could be otherwise. Whatever it is, it could be otherwise. Even the is could be otherwise. And that is what potlatch is. And in this context, I was always also happy to meet Juan Couto quite a while ago, and to realize that this gallery is something that is akin to the spirit of potlatch, and therefore it was more than appropriate to launch #2 in this gallery. So thank you very much for giving us the opportunity.